going to discuss, as a sociologist, what are the problems of exclusionary nature that organizes and structures the inability of the poor to access these acts. So the concentration at one level is on the acts, but the larger canvas that I am going to discuss with you is the nature of exclusions, what has been called marginalization by the symposium authorities, the nature of exclusions that organize and structure contemporary social life of the poor in the country, and how and why such acts cannot incorporate some of the processes and life worlds that organize the poor and therefore make them marginalized and not have permanent access to social security measures. As we know, there's a long history and discussion and debate regarding the institutionalization of equality and elimination of poverty in India. And we have therefore had these two legislations, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Act called NREGA and the Unorganized Sectors Workers Social Security Act of 2008. These are called by far the most radical of all legislations to be enacted by an Indian government. While poverty elevation programs were earlier primarily designed to address rural poverty and provided guaranteed employment only to the poor, and this was true through the Employment Guarantee Project of Maharashtra, it is for the first time that the Government of India has enacted legislation to provide social security to the poor of the entire country, not only in the rural areas, but also in the urban areas with access to BPL cards. As a result, we see these acts have received acclaim and critical attention from supporters who argue that they, for the first time, incorporate a rights approach and helps to slow down distressed sale of land, restrict migration, free bonded laborers from extra-legal relations of patronage, and make women empowered. It is this set of support and set of arguments that I would like to question when I take up an analysis of what is the social processes that organize the life worlds of the poor in this country. In order to understand this, in this paper, I move away from the discussion of the implementation problems and focus more on the conceptual map of the legislation. I argue that the problem of implementation is related to the discursive aspects of the legislation, attempt to deconstruct and explicate the assumptions that underwrite these legislation. These assumptions, I am arguing, are related to an understanding of what constitutes the poor's life worlds, their social and political resources, and their social capital. And it is an argument that suggests that there is a policy oversight regarding identifying the uneven nature of livelihoods and structural processes that organize and structure the life worlds. In order to make it more concrete, let me start off with a case study, and I think that helps to understand the problem much more. I start with a case study of a person named Govind, who belongs to the scheduled caste, is 55 years old, who has a wife, Nirmala, who is 50 years old, and they have a small plot of agricultural land measuring 1.5 acres, which is still registered in the grandfather's name in a village called Nakshet in Taluka Pen, District Raigad, Maharashtra. Govind's mother is 75 years old and is physically challenged and illiterate, is dependent on Govind and his wife for survival. This piece of land is tilled by Nirmala, who is able to grow enough paddy that lasts a family for 9 months at most. She has to get potable water from 2 kilometers away, also to do daily chores in the house, besides the work in the field. Govind has one son and 2 daughters. The son and the daughters are married, and Govind works as a security guard in a private firm in the taluka headquarters, 40 kilometers from his house and his village, on a contractual basis and earns only 3,000 rupees a month. The son, who lives permanently in Thane, which is an extension of Bombay, earns another 3,000 rupees a month, and a wife who works as a domestic help in several homes earns around 1,000 rupees a month. Govind pays his son for the monthly food expenses when he stays with his son in Thane. Govind's brother-in-law stays with his son in a rented room and is also employed on a contract basis. The brother-in-law pays Govind's son his accommodation also. All the members of Govind's family and Govind and his son have applied for registration in the NREGA scheme. Govind doesn't have a birth certificate, nor is the land in his name, but has a BPL card. Govind and his unmarried daughter are unable to get job cards because they are now urban dwellers. They reside in the rented room year-round. Govind's wife, though residing year-round in the village, is not registered for the job card. This is because she stayed single with her mother-in-law and is therefore unable to negotiate with the local authorities. Govind's mother was not provided with a job card as she is old and physically challenged. In this context, he applied for a NREGA scheme. The Tehsildar decided to give the job to Govind's son, who is not at all staying in the village. This case highlights to me the strategies of survival of Govind's household on one level. It also highlights how the economy dictates through which families reorganize themselves in small units of households, and also the poor have only the petty production to find their source of livelihood. Additionally, these households consist of individuals who are not related via blood to Govind's family, and yet survival is difficult as much of the money goes into daily expenses and medical treatment of the grandmother. There's hardly any surplus left at savings, and both Govind and his wife are getting older. If the MRG Act pays money for manual labor on piece rates, even if Govind and his wife were to get employed in the scheme, how much would they be able to earn by working in a minimum 8 hours every day? Govind and his family members also have not been able to access the Urban Social Security Act, despite possessing the BPL card. This case study, I think, highlights and gives us a way the poor is organized in this country. I would suggest that the Act misrecognizes that the household is equal to the family. And this case study demonstrates that one family can have 2 or more households, which may be located in the same territorial space or at disparate areas. Therefore, when members of the household apply for work, the administrators disqualify them on the basis of this criteria. This is especially true when households live together as joint family in rural area. So what are we arguing? More specifically, the poor, who are small peasants and petty producers, combine in exchange low-value labor, goods and services of the unorganized rural and urban economies and reproduce themselves through monetary and non-monetary activities. They are socially organized as micro-groups of individuals, households and families having kin and caste affiliations, but remain unequal among themselves in terms of gender, age, expression of sexual identities, differential abilities, access to citizenship, and group and community rights. Our focus was to understand the social system that organized petty production, wherein most of the individual households and families in this country find an economic identity. It is difficult to estimate the number of individuals, households, and families in this production system, but the data that we have from the work done by the National Commission of Unorganized Labor and Enterprise, as well as by the work done by Barbara Harris White, suggests that we are talking of 93% of the working class who is involved in this petty production. We call this system petty production because it includes semi-independent peasants who may have some land, but also people who have small family businesses, small assets, and could also be simultaneously petty commodity producers and traders. They exploit their own family members, but they also hire labor. It is clear that in India, this economy is not confined to the urban arena and organized within towns and cities as it's sometimes thought. It combines with itself peasant as well as urban informal economies. We are also arguing that this informal economy covers a range of monetized and non-monetized market transactions. This involves commodities, services produced, distributed, and consumed and reproduced. It includes household production and other forms of non-capitalist production, market exchange, including gifts. And a huge number of gifts are for weddings and festivals. They barter and those relating, and it also consists of gifts for clientele and patronage. It includes manufacturing and service industry, where it's difficult to distinguish where work is organized, where it is not. It includes market transaction of firms and units not registered for direct taxation and licensing. This informal economy is highly flexible and extremely diverse and simultaneously segmented. And because it is flexible and segmented, it covers economic sectors, strata, and regional clusters in differential combinations. Since the colonial times, it has organized various kinds of technologies, from primitive to mechanized to informational, relations of productions together with control and discipline of labor, from unfree bondage, slave labor, to free and self-employed, and various sites, households, sweatshops, small-scale industrial units, and agricultural land, in distinct ways, in different ways, at various places. The work in this economy is always slow, it's always unskilled and low-skilled. What we are suggesting is that the classic concepts of political economy do not give us a frame to understand this economy. And this economy is articulated in pre-modern sociabilities and identities to organize laborers into households which are knitted together as families and kin groups. It arranges its members to participate in a combination of work activities simultaneously and over time with extremely low wages. The most appropriate example is of workers in manufacturing, where there are no boundaries between organized and unorganized work. Thus, household or family may have members doing agriculture work, home-based production, participate in sweatshop activities, and also do retailing across time and space. What does this mean for us as sociologists? One, it implies that A, there are no difference between urban and rural areas, that households, families, and individuals combine urban and rural economic activities. Therefore, when you have an NREGA Act only for rural areas, you're constantly disempowering those parts of the households which are in urban areas. Two, it imagines that there is a natural individual worker who is fit and who is able-bodied. And this natural urban worker who is able-bodied and fit has energy to be able to work long-term for 8 hours a day. Three, and this is most significant, is that it divides the population of the country into male and female. There is another section in the population which is transgenders. It ignores them. Fourthly, it suggests that all individuals are the same according to age. A large part of households are run by single-headed women households with a lot of old people, and they cannot work for the NREGA as a representative of that household. Fifthly, it has no capacity to understand those who are physically unabled and mentally unabled. And therefore, they seem to think that anyone can work at a certain point of time for the state. All this is related to two other issues that I would just highlight. These two are the following: that the Act is based on giving individuals certain rights. It believes that all individuals are equal in terms of gender, age, expression of sexual identities, differential abilities, access to citizenship, and group and community rights. What I would like to argue that if you look at the Act, and we have a lot of case studies we have taken from the whole of the country, what we would like to argue is that there is little clarity about the variabilities and the nature of social exclusions in the country and its moorings in the colonial and post-colonial histories. It conceives of exclusions and thus writes in terms of colonial liberal philosophy based on theory of individual liberties, while simultaneously highlighting individuals' affiliation with deprived and marginal groups. We have recently a lot of literature which suggests that the state is constantly oscillating between and shifting between individual and group identity and creates therefore internal inconsistencies in this legislation. So once you are a scheduled caste, you are thought of as to be an individual, but you cannot be an individual without the community recognition. And this constant shifting creates further problems. But the most important is that thirdly, the state in India, and this is our major argument, has institutionalized a new system for disbursing these kind of social security measures. This system is that of the middleman, the broker, who always rotates between the state and the beneficiaries. The middleman introduces, interprets, and ensures that acts outreach to the beneficiaries through a commission and rent payment. We have a system where the elder becomes the middleman to ensure that he or she can give, inform the state and help to give the beneficiaries some benefits. And they also use, to their advantage, they are used by the parties and the state bureaucracy, and there the play of caste, community, and gender affiliation, and also of geography, allow for the distribution of patronage and therefore influence the distribution of resources. These legislations do not recognize the practice of power that organizes actors and institutions of state in contemporary India. In the end, I would like to conclude by suggesting that we have tried to show in our work that there is a complex set of life worlds that structure the organization of the poor in India. These are not poverty for rural parts or alone. This is not a case of poverty for urban parts alone. That the urban and the rural part intervene and intersect together in many ways to structure the way in which individuals access economic activities and intervene to define their works, their life worlds. There is geographical isolation, labor market segmentation, lack of literacy, lack of access to formal education, and together with stigma. And we would like to suggest in our work that it is the intersection of all these that organize the life worlds, and the acts that we have today do not understand these intersectional exclusions and therefore cannot reach out to the way in which the poor are organized in today's world. And this kind of analysis that we have done is to stretch out how a sociologist can study the poor. We generally accept the law and we see the implementation. Rather, if we look at what is the poor and then see if the law actually depicts the way the poor organizes, then as sociologists, we can contribute to the reframing of laws and therefore of policy. Lastly, I would like to suggest that since the time of independence, when development became the catchword for trying to distribute and filter the resources and redistribute resources of the country, this is the time that we have to rethink whether the discourse of development that we inherited in the 1950s should remain and be part of our way to think and organize the way development programs and policies are made out.
People can be marginalized due to their caste, class, gender, age, disability, and other ascriptive criteria over which they have no control. In the context of development, specifically, there can be two types of marginalization. Some groups or categories or persons remain outside the purview of mainstream development, and others are negatively affected by it. So the first problem is that of inclusion-exclusion. This has led to the discourse of inclusive growth, which seeks inclusion along economic and social identity lines. The way to address such marginalization is to enable and include excluded or marginalized categories of people. This can be done through proactive government policies, which encourage the development of human capabilities. The state has a large role in bringing about such inclusion. Civil society plays a role by giving voice to neglected groups and categories and putting pressure on the state to give them their due. Marginalization can also be the result of the negative effect of development policies and trajectories on certain groups or categories of people. Specific groups of people may become poorer as a result of specific development policies. Others may be robbed of their traditional livelihoods or resources, and yet others may not benefit from new technologies that are introduced and indeed be negatively affected by them. Thus, tribal communities have been increasingly marginalized as economic growth has taken off. Who gets marginalized is a combination of their specific characteristics, and an assessment of the marginalized has to be based on detailed study and understanding. As an example, while the majority of a local tribal population may be marginalized due to certain development policies and processes of globalization, some tribal political leaders may benefit and actually connive in the impoverishment of their brethren. Some Dalit groups benefit while others are further immiserized. Two Dalit communities in the same state may experience different fortunes, as we have seen in the case of Malas and Madigas of Andhra Pradesh. Thus, history, social movements, political conditions, and economic development processes combine to produce different effects of marginalization on different groups of people.